Получается, из-за того, что с двух сторон отбойники, как бы 3 ряда, вот этот ряд.
Trains are stopped in Crimea. Military convoys cannot pass through Kerch. The bridge is not being dismantled, but the arteries are suddenly spasming. Trucks, wagons, and tankers are being held up. Panic is everywhere. People are in dire straits because the ammunition supply for the army protecting them has been cut off. Explosives and fuel destined for Crimea are stuck at stations on the Russian mainland. People are looking on with concern because the next alarm could completely close the Kerch Bridge. And both Russian residents and the Russian army in Crimea are aware of this. So, is it necessary to destroy a bridge to take it out of the game?
Imagine waking up in Moscow, a city of over 12 million people, and discovering that the main artery connecting the capital to St. Petersburg, Russia's second-largest city and cultural jewel, has suddenly been cut off. The land bridge, worth over $20 billion in infrastructure, is no longer functioning. Trains have stopped, highways are gridlocked, and supply chains are collapsing. For many Russians, it would feel like a disaster striking overnight, because this corridor is more than just a road or railway. It is the lifeline of Russia's political, economic, and cultural heart. The story of what this link means, what happens if it falls apart, and why millions panic at even the thought of it, is one that takes us deep into the history of Russia, its modern challenges, and the possibility of a crisis that could ripple across the world. The land bridge between Moscow and St. Petersburg is one of the busiest transportation routes in the whole of Russia. Spanning over 700 kilometers, it connects two cities that symbolize Russia's dual identity: Moscow, the center of political power, and St. Petersburg, the window to Europe, filled with art, history, and industry. Every single day, thousands of trains, buses, and trucks move along this route, carrying goods, fuel, food, and millions of passengers. If this connection is gone, the impact is not just on a few commuters. It affects millions of lives instantly. This is why the very idea of it being shut down sends shivers of fear across the country. To understand why this bridge is so critical, you need to understand Russia itself. Unlike smaller countries where people can shift easily to alternative routes, Russia's vast geography makes every major corridor essential. Moscow sits in the heart of European Russia, while St. Petersburg, founded by Peter the Great as a gateway to the West, is Russia's most important port on the Baltic Sea. The corridor between them is not simply a convenience, it is a necessity. Energy supplies, imported goods, military logistics, and food distribution all depend on it. If that lifeline is broken, Moscow faces shortages, St. Petersburg faces isolation, and the Russian economy begins to bleed. Now picture the chaos. Millions of people suddenly panic as rumors spread that the land bridge is gone. Long lines form at supermarkets in both cities as people rush to stockpile food. Gasoline prices spike overnight as fuel trucks are stranded on blocked highways. Factories in St. Petersburg, which rely on components delivered from Moscow, are forced to halt production. Hospitals begin to feel the pressure as vital medicines and equipment are delayed. Families trying to travel between the cities are stuck in limbo. And as the panic grows, social media fills with images of empty shelves, endless traffic jams, and trains standing still. The sense of collapse becomes real, even if only a part of the corridor is disrupted. The symbolic meaning of the bridge is just as powerful as its physical function. Moscow and St. Petersburg have always represented two sides of Russia, the political center and the cultural soul. If that link is broken, Russians feel as though the nation itself is fractured. It would be like cutting off Washington, D.C. from New York City in the United States, or severing London from Manchester in the UK. It's not just about logistics, it's about identity and unity. That's why the news of any threat to the corridor spreads like wildfire and causes millions to worry about the future. But why do people talk about Ukraine in this story? Because every time tensions flare in the region, speculation grows about Russia's vulnerabilities, And one of the biggest vulnerabilities is infrastructure. The $20 billion land bridge is heavily fortified, but no system is completely safe. Modern warfare is no longer about massive armies marching across borders. It is about disrupting supply chains, cutting off communication, and creating panic among civilians. The idea of a main supply corridor being hit plays into this fear perfectly, because it shows how fragile stability can be. Even if Ukraine never touched the corridor, the thought alone is enough to cause sleepless nights in Moscow. This raises the bigger question: how does a country respond when its lifeline is under threat? Russia has spent decades building redundancies into its transportation network, but the truth is that no alternative matches the efficiency of the Moscow-St. Petersburg link. Air travel can only handle a fraction of the daily passenger load. Smaller roads cannot manage the heavy freight traffic. The railways are designed to carry bulk cargo, not suddenly absorb all commercial demand. So even if alternative routes exist, they cannot prevent the sense of panic that spreads when the main corridor shuts down. From an economic perspective, the consequences are devastating. Moscow is the hub of Russia's financial system, while St. Petersburg is the country's industrial and maritime center. Billions of dollars worth of goods move along the corridor every week. Shutting it down is like cutting a vein in the body's circulatory system. The flow stops, and the entire system begins to fail. Businesses collapse, jobs are lost, and inflation surges as basic goods become scarce. Ordinary people feel the pain immediately, whether they are farmers trying to sell produce or families trying to buy groceries. The panic is not theoretical. It is practical, lived, and unavoidable. Socially, the crisis also creates divisions. Citizens begin to question whether the government can protect them. In Moscow, whispers spread that the capital is hoarding supplies, while St. Petersburg residents complain of neglect. Old rivalries between the two cities resurface, fueled by fear and uncertainty. Protests might even break out as frustrated citizens demand answers. The government, struggling to calm the situation, turns to propaganda to assure the public that everything is under control. But in an age of smartphones and instant communication, reassurances often fail to match the images people see with their own eyes. And then there is the psychological impact. Panic is contagious. When one person rushes to stock up on food, 10 others follow. When rumors of a gasoline shortage spread, people rush to fill their tanks, creating the very shortage they feared. Fear magnifies itself, and soon the crisis takes on a life of its own. Even if the corridor is restored quickly, the damage to public trust lingers for months, sometimes years. People begin to question whether their country is as stable as they once thought, and that doubt reshapes the way they live their daily lives. Looking at the global stage, the disruption of Russia's main corridor would not just be a domestic issue. Europe, already strained by geopolitical tensions, would face ripple effects. St. Petersburg's ports are key gateways for energy exports, and any slowdown affects global oil and gas markets. Investors watching the chaos might pull out of Russian markets, driving the ruble down further. Neighboring countries, already cautious of Russia's moves, would see the crisis as a sign of weakness, shifting alliances and strategies. In other words, the panic of millions in Russia quickly becomes a ripple that spreads across the world. But there is also another layer to this story, the symbolic message it sends to the rest of the world. If a $20 billion land bridge can be disrupted, what does that say about modern infrastructure in general? Are any nations truly safe from such vulnerabilities? The answer is sobering. Every country depends on critical corridors, whether it's the highways of the United States, the rail networks of Europe, or the shipping lanes of Asia. If one disruption can cause panic in Russia, it serves as a reminder that we all live in a fragile system where stability depends on a few narrow lifelines. Some argue that this vulnerability is exactly why governments invest so heavily in defense and infrastructure protection. But others point out that no system is invincible. History shows us that even the most advanced nations can be brought to their knees by unexpected disruptions. The panic around Moscow's land bridge is not just a Russian story. It is a human story about how fragile our modern lives really are. So why do millions panic? Because they know deep down that life is built on thin threads. The food we eat, the fuel we burn, the medicine we need, all of it moves along corridors like the Moscow-St. Petersburg link. Take it away, and the illusion of stability collapses. That is why people react so strongly to the idea of the corridor being gone. It is not about politics or even war. It is about survival. In the end, the story of Moscow's land bridge is a warning. A warning that modern civilization is only as strong as the connections that bind it together. A $20 billion investment may seem unshakable, but history shows us that nothing is truly permanent. Bridges collapse, railways fail, and nations panic. For Russia, the corridor between Moscow and St. Petersburg is more than just a road. It is the beating heart of the country, and when the heart stops, the body trembles. That is why, whether it is rumor, speculation, or reality, the disappearance of this lifeline creates a storm of fear that reaches far beyond the borders of Russia. And so the world watches, as it always does, wondering not just what happens if Moscow's land bridge is gone, but what it means for all of us, living in a fragile age where one broken link can unravel the lives of millions.